To what extent is your body image impacting your day-to-day decisions, right? Can you leave the house without getting ready? Can you engage in your activities or in things that you feel passionately about or things that feel important to you, regardless of what your body shape or size is, regardless of how you look that day, regardless of XYZ goals that society may tell you you need to achieve before you can do anything else?
With me today is Samantha Olson. Samantha is a clinical mental health counselor who specializes in helping women with disordered eating patterns. She has worked at the Center of Change since 2014, which is a Utah-based counseling center for eating disorders. She is passionate about treating eating disorders, anxiety, depression, and trauma, and is currently the program director at the Cottonwood Heights location. We are going to dive into the intricacies of navigating how do we stay focused on our health goals without letting it have any negative effects on our mental health. This is a really difficult and nuanced conversation, but it applies to so many women. If you have struggled with wanting to have an outcome in your body, like wanting to feel better or lose weight, but when you do so, you become a little bit fixated on it or develop some unhealthy patterns with food or with your body, then this is going to be a really valuable conversation for you. Honestly, I think it's a valuable conversation for all of us.
I think a lot of us, especially women in this culture, are going to carry some kind of standard of what it means to look good, feel good. And so considering how does that impact what you're able to do in a day or not able to do?
Samantha, welcome in. Thanks for coming on our episode today. I think it's going to be a good conversation.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
We are so happy to have you on because this is a really important topic we're reviewing today and also a very sensitive topic. So we are going to be talking about food and body image and relationship with that, and also disordered eating patterns, and we'll touch a little bit on eating disorders. So I want to mention that as a trigger alert if someone feels like this is a really complicated subject for them, that they know their boundaries, they know to listen in a mental space where they're safe. But I think it's so important because it's so far-reaching. So I'll leave that disclaimer there, and if people feel like they need to adjust their listening, then I encourage them to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, first, Samantha, you work for a clinic that serves people with eating disorders and disordered eating patterns called the Center for Change. Mm-hmm. Will you start by telling us a little bit about your journey of how you came to be so passionate about this? And then we'll dive into really what we can do about this.
Yeah, for sure. So I've worked at Center for Change going on 11 years now. Eating disorders was just always kind of appealing for me going through high school, having my own history with some disordered patterns.
Yeah.
Going into college and learning more about psychology and eating disorders in general, it was something that I definitely knew I wanted to explore as I became a therapist. And as I worked at Center for Change, first as line staff and then moving into a therapy position and now a clinical director, I'm very passionate about serving the community that we serve. Eating disorders do not discriminate. And so it is very, I would say, prominent in our community. And that's something that I just really believe in, is helping those who struggle. And I really love it. And I've become very passionate about it through the years. And the more I learn, the more passionate I become. So I'm happy to be here to share some of my perspectives and things that I've learned working with this population.
When I worked as an OBGYN, I took care of all women, and full disclosure, like I didn't ask people if they had an eating disorder. I probably had less than 5 patients over 10 years that came in and said, any medical problems? Yes, I have an eating disorder. But now in my current practice, I actively ask most of my patients, if not all of my patients, do you have any history of disordered eating patterns or any concerns with food? And I have been shocked at the number of women that say yes. And it's well over half. 70, 80% have some amount of disordered relationship with food. Where do you think that comes from, first of all? How do we get to this place? As human beings, as animals, this should have worked really well, right? We should be hungry, and then we should eat, and then we should be done. Where and how did this get so confused?
Yeah, that is such a great question. It is shocking, the amount of people who are impacted by disordered eating. And I think a lot of it comes from how immersed our culture is in diet culture. So when I say diet culture, I'm talking about beliefs around food, beliefs around exercise, beliefs around bodies, and just the way that we have idealized certain standards when it comes to those things, and ways that we have put down, other bodies, or if people exercise or don't exercise a certain way, if people eat or don't eat a certain way. I think we have created a lot of ideals that are tied to morality, self-worth, worthiness of acceptance, or even being attractive. So I think that we have, most of us, I would say, grown up in a culture that teaches that, which means we're learning it from our parents, because our parents learn it from somewhere else. We're learning it from the media. We're learning it from social media. We're learning it from so many different facets. And even, especially in Utah, I was looking at some of the numbers this morning to see the latest research. We are, I think, number 6 in the nation for plastic surgery.
Not a number you want to be at the top of?
No.
Yeah.
We're very high up there. And so even the standards of what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be an attractive woman or a desirable woman? We are one of the top in the nation for what does it look like to be attractive. And so even when it comes to things such as plastic surgery or what it means to age, right? We've created all of these standards. And of course, one of the ways that we've been taught to control how we look is through our food. And so why wouldn't we be set up to be disordered in the ways that we're viewing our bodies and viewing food, viewing exercise? So it hasn't become as simple as, eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full, because of all the messaging that we get.
You mentioned at the beginning of that talking about body image, and so much of body image is wrapped up in everything that you just said. Will you tell us a little bit more about the idea of body image, and how do we work with this? How should we be approaching this? Because I think there are some times where if I want my body to be shaped a certain way, that may not always be bad, right? If I say like, oh, I'd love to look a certain way, sometimes, is that always bad? There are definitely times when we have aesthetic preferences where we look in the mirror and say, I'd prefer if I did this, right? So how do we differentiate between when there's a healthy desire for what we want from our body versus maybe starting to trigger some unhealthy cascades of feelings towards our body and that body relationship?
That's a great question. Something that I want to build some awareness about as we're having this conversation is severity, right? So like you said, what's wrong with wanting to look a certain way? Or some people think that when I talk about body acceptance, it's not getting ready in the morning, right?
Yeah.
And I think the reality is body care is still a part of body acceptance. And so I would like to touch on maybe 3 different things. So body acceptance, body trust, and body neutrality. So those are 3 kind of key things that I think can be actionable as we're working on our relationship with our own bodies. So considering severity of things, I would have people think about to what extent is your body image impacting your day-to-day decisions, right? Can you leave the house without getting ready? Can you engage in your activities or in things that you feel passionately about or things that feel important to you, regardless of what your body shape or size is, regardless of how you look that day, regardless of XYZ goals that society may tell you need to achieve before you can do anything else, right? So I think that impact is important to consider. I think a lot of us, especially women in this culture, are going to carry some kind of standard of what it means to look good, feel good. And so considering how does that impact what you're able to do in a day or not able to do. Something that I hear a lot from women that I work with is, well, I can't do XYZ until I look like ABC, right? And that, if we consider that mindset of how is my body holding me back, and how we put that kind of pressure.
In quotes, how holding me back.
Yes, exactly. And so being able to still live according to your core values, being able to live authentically regardless of your current body state, because bodies are always changing, right? As a doctor, you see that, especially working with,
pregnancy. And,
And so I was even talking to a client who's currently pregnant of let's not worry about you, quote unquote, rebounding. after pregnancy. Let's focus on, wow, look at what your body can do. Your body's growing a baby, and then it's going to, feed that baby, and then you're going to raise that baby. Body shape and size at that time doesn't really matter, right? Yeah. If you're able to live authentically according to your core values. So impact of body image, or, negative or positive body image, is something that I think is important to consider.
Yeah, I think we see that in other mental health too, right? If you say, like, what's the difference between someone who's sad versus someone who has depression? Or what's the difference between someone who's anxious about something versus someone who has anxiety? And correct me if I'm wrong, because you're in the mental health world more than I am, but one of the big differentiating factors is how it affects your life, right? If you're anxious about something and you go about your life doing everything, then fine. That's normal for us to have certain ranges of emotion. But if you're so anxious that it keeps you from living your life, you can't leave the house or you can't go to an event, then that becomes a mental health disorder. And the same is true then with the relationship with our body. Is we're all going to have thoughts about our body, and that's just a fact. I think it's unrealistic for us to try to aim for the point where we don't think about our body, and the way that our body looks. We're going to look in the mirror and we're going to say, that's what my body looks like. But when it becomes a disorder or an unhealthy relationship is when it really inhibits what we're trying to do. So I appreciate that explanation.
Absolutely.
Where does function fit in there? Because obviously if you have, a weight or a pain issue or something like that where the function is really inhibited, where you say, like, I can't even get my body to work the way that I want it to. How do we approach, where does function fit into this idea of body acceptance, body trust, body neutrality? Where is function in there of how we should be thinking about our bodies?
Yeah. And I think everyone is different when it comes to body function, right? And the piece that I would ask, and I guess part of my disclaimer in talking about all of this is, can we approach our own individual body image or relationship with food or exercise with just a curiosity? Yes. And when I say curiosity, it's just trying to be objective and thinking in an open manner without automatically putting judgments on it. So I do want to also qualify, everyone is different. And so looking at body function, I think a hope is that we're all kind of functioning, according to our set ability, according to our set realistic expectations. And sometimes that doesn't happen with things like sickness or chronic pain, pregnancy, right? And so I think part of the body acceptance piece is accepting part of a body is being imperfect and is being limited, right? I talk to people who are maybe addicted to exercise or who over-exercise is usually how we refer to it. And there's this expectation that they don't need rest days, or that if they're taking a rest day, there's active rest, meaning they're still exercising. Or if they are exercising, they should be able to continue throughout their day without being sore or being tired. And so I think a part that I would ask people to be curious about for themselves is, like, are your expectations realistic? A body acceptance piece is accepting limitations, accepting that our bodies also, while they can be strong, get tired, or that even if we are quote unquote healthy, we can still get sick, or that we can still struggle with, other things that come up like chronic pain, fatigue, things like that. And so part of that body acceptance piece and body trust is trusting that our bodies will send us signals and messages that are actually protective. Because I think often in a disordered mindset or with disordered expectations, we reject our bodies in the sense that, oh, you are my enemy. And so in order to control you, I need to, start doing these behaviors or start acting or living this way so that you are the shape, size, whatever thing you may fill in with that. And so we start rejecting a lot of, I think, natural body cues that are actually meant to help us and save us, right? There's a great book called The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor, and she talks about sickness in that book of when we get sick, we may get irritated because we get congested, our throat hurts, we're tired, we want to be doing all these things. And so in that way, we start to view our body as our enemy because it's like, why do you feel like this? When really what's happening, our body's fighting infection.
It's telling us to slow down.
Yes. And so I think that body trust and body acceptance piece are accepting, like, hey, my body actually does want to show up with me. It is my, companion. And I think sometimes that is a piece that people struggle with, especially when it feels like our body has betrayed us by getting sick or, going through things that we just weren't expecting.
This was a huge point, and I wanted to bring it up, so I'm glad you're going there, is this idea. I deal with a lot of patients with chronic illness, and definitely somewhere along the way, most of them lose trust in their body. Most of them start to detach from their body and disconnect a little bit, honestly, because they're not doing it intentionally. Mm-hmm. It just feels like the best way to survive. And sometimes that starts with just like pain. You get pain in your right knee, and then later the next week you get pain in your left toe. And, it just always seems like your body is getting in your way somehow. Like you keep trying to do things and the body is getting in the way. So people do develop this relationship of sort of frustration at first and then sometimes total disconnect. Mm-hmm. And I think that can happen certainly with disordered eating patterns of any kind, because we just, like you mentioned, learn to ignore those cues. Like I said, as cave people, we would have been hungry, we would have eaten, and then we would have been done eating. And now we have this really complicated relationship with food where a lot of us don't even recognize our hunger cues and our full cues. So how do we go about learning to trust our bodies? How do we go about reconnecting that relationship? I really see it as like a two-person relationship almost. It's like our brain and our body, and we have to almost view our body as an entity with compassion and say, oh, there you are. What are you trying to tell me? How do you approach rebuilding that connection between our brain and our body?
Yeah. And again, I say this, everyone's different. And I think that we're getting better as a society, as a culture of, I would say, like, qualifying mental health as valid, right? Yeah. But I think historically there was a very significant stigma around, you don't get help, don't talk about this.
Yeah.
And now I think especially this is a way that I think social media can be positive, is that people are talking about it more. And people are recognizing, like, oh, we are kind of disordered in how we talk about bodies and how we talk about food and movement. And so I think being able to, I think part of that body trust is recognizing exactly what you said. The mind is a part of that. And so recognizing that if you are seeking to be physically healthy, there is a piece of mental health as well of, go see a therapist, start meditating, go see a dietitian who is, educated about disordered eating, and start resourcing yourself. I think we are living in a current culture where there's no excuse for not seeking out resources. Even if, wherever you fall on the SES scale, there's still access to free resources. There's podcasts just like this. There's, YouTube videos. There are pages to follow that can help build up that idea that we deserve to be holistically healthy, not just physically healthy, not just mentally healthy, not just, all the other pieces, sexual, spiritual, all those pieces that tie in. We can also practice, being mentally healthy and seeking resources for that. So I think being able to build that awareness first would be that first step towards how, to answer your question, how do I start to build up that body trust again if I've been disconnected with my body? Are you aware of that? Do you know that? And if you are becoming aware, how can you start to resource yourself towards reconnecting with body? There's so many physical practices tied to yoga or, just mindful movement that's also a way to reconnect with body. And it's a process. I think also, again, coming back to expectations, be gentle. Let yourself ease back into that relationship. I like how you're talking about it being a relationship, between brain and body. I think building that relationship with your body is also like building a relationship with a person.
Exactly.
Of, how are you investing time and energy into yourself and into rebuilding that relationship? You're getting to know maybe your body again. For people who have been pregnant and then not pregnant and maybe coming out of like that time of nursing and just really being with your child 24/7, like, who are you after that? And what is your relationship with your body? Because I think after being pregnant and kind of being a vessel for another body, rebuilding that relationship with your own body as it's independent body, right? And so I think there are a lot of layers to how you can start reconnecting to your body if you've been disconnected.
Yeah, I love hearing you talk about that. As you're talking, I'm thinking about all of the different ways that actually we can connect to our body. And I've not really connected these things in the past, but I think about, as we deal with even sexual health, of reconnecting to the body and just being aware of the sensations you feel, or eating, the health around eating and noticing, like, I feel hungry. What does that actually feel like? Well, I feel like there's bubbles in my stomach, or I feel like a pit, like it's getting sucked in, or, what does hunger feel like to me? What does satiated feel like to me? What does full feel like to me? And so I mentioned, like, I haven't really connected these dots of the difference between feeling our bodies in physical sensations around, like, intimacy or sexuality, but also feeling our body around food, and also feeling our body around exercise. What does it feel like when I do yoga? What does it feel like when I dance? What does it feel like when I do strength training? Like, all of these different aspects we can use to reconnect with our body. So if we find that one is particularly difficult for us, like for some women it's sexuality, I hope this makes sense. I'm not just like jumping around here, but if food is a really big issue for us, that we can't even begin to reconnect to our body around food, maybe we can start by reconnecting to our body in a way that feels safer to us, maybe around intimacy, or maybe around movement, or maybe around even a body scan when we're laying in bed at night. And that's one of the exercises we do for the nervous system to get out of fight or flight, is to just focus on the here and now, to say, what do my toes feel like right now? What does the ball of my foot feel like right now? What is the arch of my foot, the heel, the calf, the knee? What does it feel like right now? And by bringing presence to those different body parts, we just start to increase that communication of that relationship between my brain and my body. And then the body can continue to tell us things. And I think that can be, like I said, I'm just putting this together, that I think we can use the areas that feel stronger to us to retrain that connection and bring that together, and then utilize that in the areas that may feel weaker for us.
Absolutely. I love that.
Well, let's talk a little bit more then about body image. We talked about maybe it's formed by early childhood experiences or other experiences that we have growing up, or social expectations. How changeable is that body image, that, because it's deeply ingrained in our brains, right? This idea of how I am. How can we actually change that, or are we actually trying to just change the way we interact with that? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. It does make sense. And I feel like I would not be doing the work that I did if I did not think the body image was changeable.
Yeah.
I think I really want to validate that a lot of people who go into a space where they are actively working toward body acceptance, body trust, body neutrality, it can feel like we're swimming against the current sometimes, because I could probably leave this office and drive any which freeway, main road, and see all of these signs and advertising for how can I change my appearance next? What is the next thing that I can invest in to make myself look, quote unquote, better or more aligned with the beauty standards? And so I think I really want to validate that it's a tough journey to want to begin. And if you're not there yet, that's okay. So I want to throw that out there for people. But yes, I definitely think it's changeable. And there are, again, different life experiences that people are coming in with. I think we are very heavily impacted by our culture, by our family culture, by our communities. And this could be a part of like any group that we may be a part of, right? And so I think considering the different intersectionalities, first and foremost, if there are traumas, for example, tied to your body, that may be a place to start, is trauma work, right? If there are things that have happened with your body or to your body that you need to address, that may be a start. And some of that, and that's where I think, the conversation around disordered eating or eating disorders can get tricky, is, are you stable enough to do that work physically, mentally, medically even, right? And then there's other ways, I think, is where, if I can kind of back it up and go back to just basics of a foundation, how's your awareness? How are you noticing, how your body may or may not be impacting your ability to engage in your life? And so I took a few notes of just things to be aware of that some people don't even recognize are a part of their body image. For example, time or energy spent in front of the mirror. How long are you looking in the mirror? And when you're looking in the mirror, are you picking apart your body? Are you just getting ready? When you get dressed in the morning, how many different times are you changing? And if we consider your clothing, are you wearing clothing that fits? Are you allowing yourself to buy clothing that fits your body today? Or are you you have maybe some outfits or some things that feel comfortable, but you have other clothing in your closet that you're aspiring to, right? So even like those ways, I think one of the questions that you presented to me before the podcast was, are women even aware of their negative body image? And I think, again, building that awareness of how do my feelings about my body impact what I'm doing, and even the time and energy that I'm spending into thinking or acting around my body, food, and movement. And so, I think to consider, how are you actually engaging with your body? Those are some things that I think some women are just not even aware of as part of like, quote unquote, negative body image.
Yeah, it just feels true to them.
Yes.
It doesn't feel like it's positive or negative. It's just like, it feels true to them. I think one of the things that's really difficult too is the self-talk that we have in our brains as we're looking at ourselves in the mirror. And I think about the impact of social media on this, and really not just social media, but how visual we are now, right? You think back in the day, people had like one photo of them taken ever. And we look now at social media and especially our kids, we might have bajillions of photos taken of our kids. But, as we look at ourselves, if I look at a photo of myself and I'm leaning funny and I have a roll, coming over my side, I'm going to be like, oh, gross. Don't use that picture. Like, I want to let me take it again. And then I'll sit up really tall so that roll doesn't fit in there. And we see this with social media, right? You see some people bringing it to the surface where they say, what do they say? Like the actual photo and then Instagram, right? Where they're showing the comparison there. Yeah. And that's where it starts feeling really difficult, because when we look at it, if I look at a picture and I say, well, yeah, I want the picture that doesn't have the roll, or I want the picture that doesn't have my wrinkles, or I want the picture that doesn't have me making a weird face. And you've already mentioned this a little bit. I think what you mentioned before was, if it's just a passing thought, then we're going to have those passing thoughts. But if it's like, I do not have pictures taken of me in case they might have a roll, obviously that's the extreme. But in terms of social media and filters and perfected versions of people that we see online, and then we're comparing that to me, not filtered and not perfected, and just standing in front of my mirror, how do we just make sense of that, of even what is reality? Because I think it's very skewed. I think it's very altered now with how visual we are, how many photos of everyone there are, and how easy it is to alter those photos. It can leave the rest of us looking at our unaltered and unfiltered selves feeling really bad.
Yeah. Yes. And I think this is an important thing to talk about, especially living in Utah. Again, if we touch back to that, there's a very appearance-based expectation in Utah. And it's not even just how do I look, but how am I presenting to my community? What are people thinking about me? What do they believe about me and my family? I think there is a very kind of perfectionistic lifestyle in a lot of parts of Utah. And so I think even just acknowledging that, of how am I showing up here, and what's really valuable to me? And when I say values, I'm not talking about, religion. I'm not talking about belief system. I'm talking about what to your core feels important. What is your compass? What is bringing you purpose? What is bringing you fulfillment? And your example of a picture being taken, instead of focusing on, oh, is that what I really look like? Or I can't believe you got that angle of me. Can we retake it? What are you trying to memorialize? Right? So refocusing on what was the point of this picture in the first place, right? And so that's where it's difficult maybe with like family pictures, where you're paying a professional to capture, those very specific memories of your family at that time, or you at that time. But I think being able to refocus on, what are my personal values, and what do I want to remember about this? And can I acknowledge that, yes, there is this perfectionistic stance on social media, and is that what I want my page to be? Is that how I really want to show up? And for some people, yes, right? For some people, especially I think in Utah, there's a very particular community of like influencers and ways of life, and that is a part of it. And also considering how self-care is community care. So if I can show up and show that I accept my body as it is today, how does that give permission to the person next to me to also accept their body and to just be here?
Hey there, listeners. Just a quick break to tell you about something that could make a big difference in your life or the life of a woman you care about. Here at Uplift for Her, we specialize in integrative women's health, offering comprehensive support for every stage of life. Whether you're navigating menopause and need expert HRT advice, looking to shed those stubborn pounds, or seeking for help with your mental well-being, we've got you covered. We combine the best of traditional and functional medicine with personalized health coaching and dietitian support here at our Salt Lake City-based clinic. We ensure that your unique needs are met with the care and expertise you deserve. At Uplift for Her, we're here to help you feel your best inside and out. Ready to take the next step in your health journey? Visit us at upliftforher.com or give us a call today. We have services available for those of you living in the state of Utah and some services available for those of you outside of Utah. Now let's get back to the episode.
Other things to consider besides just touching back in with values, things that are bringing you purpose and fulfillment and happiness. I would say, we've been talking about building a relationship with your body. Recognizing what does your body do for you? Mm-hmm. If your body is a vessel, and again, there's these natural things like aging, there's these natural things of like maybe slowing down, there's these natural things of energy changes, like there are just realistic pieces of having a body. What does it do for you every day? Mm-hmm. What was something that your body did for you today that you enjoyed? Could you hug your child or your partner, or were you able to laugh with someone? Did you have something that tasted really good or that just felt good in your body? Were you able to walk somewhere, right? So kind of refocusing on body function versus, how your body looks. There's these researchers, Lexi and Lindsay Kite, and they've written a book called More Than a Body, and they talk a lot about that, of how the body is an instrument, not an ornament. And I think a lot of women live with this expectation that we are meant to be ornaments, we're meant to be viewed. How can we refocus to being instrumental? What is our body function? What are we doing?
And when you say refocus, I think I'm envisioning, rebalancing. Like, yes, maybe we are going to have still some thoughts around being ornamental. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to look a certain way, and I care about that to some degree, but to what degree? And is that degree that we're putting the focus on it serving us or not serving us? Versus how much can I focus on the function? And so picturing it like a scale tipping, like, okay, so maybe I don't want that picture, of the whatever, but can I spend more time celebrating, like, I had babies and that pooch right there is from where it got stretched out from carrying those babies, and that's where my belly my diastasis is, it doesn't come together anymore, whatever the issue is. But can we at least give weighted time? Can we at least give equal time, if not more time, to the idea of gratitude and function and just other thinking than the amount of time that we spend analyzing the wrinkle and the fold and the roll and all of those things? Like, maybe we don't get rid of it completely, because that's probably unrealistic in our culture for most of us. But can we at least weight that time towards, like, hey, look what I can do. I just did a 30-minute workout, or I lifted heavier than I've lifted so far, or I'm training for a marathon and I'm getting halfway there. I think one of the things you mentioned before we started recording, but you've kind of alluded to it several times, is this idea of where you're starting from. So if you're starting from an eating disorder, where you have had true health problems, or you've had significant psychological problems because of the relationship with food and maybe controls over food and body, that's going to need a different approach here than someone who is, trying to lose a couple pounds because they don't like the rolls, and maybe they're starting to fixate on it too much. Those are going to be really different scenarios. So when you say, like, it depends on the person, everyone's different, I think that is important to recognize that we really can't have a blanket statement, because depending on what your frame of reference is, if you're coming from an eating disorder background versus just trying to kind of figure things out as a woman in a culture that kind of puts too much pressure on it, those approaches are going to look way different. For someone who isn't super struggling with an eating disorder, they maybe can do some of this on their own and still entertain the idea of like, maybe I'll get, Botox so my face looks a certain way, or maybe I'll get a tummy tuck, or maybe I'll get a breast augmentation. Some people may be able to do fine with a little bit of that, but there are going to be some people who have struggled with body image so significantly that they can't touch it with a 10-foot pole, right? They have to really remove all of it and really just focus on different aspects like function.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is an important distinction. Again, I think body acceptance, body trust, body neutrality is not having the expectation that, you're going to feel great about your body every day.
Right.
Notice that I have not said body positivity.
Yeah.
So it is within my own particular framework as a therapist that body positivity is not the most helpful goal. Can it be a goal for someone? Absolutely. Am I happy to be in that space with someone? Absolutely. And someone who's maybe further along in their body image journey may have that as their goal. I would say I practice more of a body neutrality, because something that I've noticed about the body positivity movement is it still puts a lot of emphasis on how do you think and feel about your body?
Yeah.
Whereas body neutrality is like,
stop thinking and feeling about your body.
Just like be with your body.
Yeah.
Be with it and go with it. If it feels a certain way, if it looks a certain way, it's there.
Yeah. I was going to bring you back to that because you did mention the body acceptance, and then the body trust, and then the body neutrality. And you talked about the other two. Tell us, just define for us, I think we've got it at this point, but just define for us, what do you mean when you say body neutrality?
Yeah, I think a significant part of body neutrality is both acceptance and trust, but it's also just being able to be with your body, right? Of you can even think or feel a certain way about your body of like, oh, I don't really look good today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm still going to continue throughout my day, or, I don't feel well in my body today.
Yeah.
And I can still, if I'm sick, I can just be neutral and objective that, oh, I'm sick. I need to rest, or I need to eat this food to feel better, or I need to drink, a ginger ale to help my tummy feel better. And there's no judgments. It's not about being able to attain something or not attain something. It's just we're being present and we're being in tune. Yeah. And that's more of how I would describe neutrality, whereas, the negativity is hyper-focused on all the things we hate. Positivity could be, oh, here are all the things I love. Whereas neutrality, we're just there. We're with our body, and we're accepting it and we're trusting it.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because I do think that's an important distinction of it's not just roses and rainbows all the time. Like, it's okay still to have negative or positive feelings about your body. It's just being with your body. You mentioned earlier some steps you could offer to help people kind of tune in on these things and to hone their idea of body acceptance. Is there anything you want to say at this point about some of those steps that we can actually take?
Yeah. So to kind of continue with what we were talking about, something that also comes up with a lot of women that I work with is comparison. So again, after you've built this awareness and you're kind of going through, well, how are you showing up with your body, and what do your thoughts look like? What do your urges look like? What do your actions look like, right?
Yeah.
And so we're kind of considering those three different things. And like I was saying, can we start decreasing how we're comparing ourselves to other people? Can we be interdependent? We're living in communities, we're in houses with other people in them, we have a partner or not, or whatever, just being around groups of friends or groups of other women. I think we're also living in a culture that encourages us to be very competitive amongst ourselves, especially as women. And so being able to notice, well, can I decrease how I'm comparing myself? Can I start lifting myself up and also lift others up? Or am I constantly in that space of like, how do I measure up to her? Or how am I not meeting what she's doing? There's this, and I think especially what I've noticed living in Utah, there is this kind of like keeping up with the Jones mentality of what are they doing and what are they doing and how can I align myself or be even better, right?
Yeah.
And that's not always bad. I think that there is a sense of we want to feel successful and we want to feel like we're doing well. And again, it comes back to that, how is that impacting us? So I would say being aware of comparison. I already mentioned this, but like clothing, are you allowing yourself to just have clothing that feels good on you and that fits? And being able to show up in those spaces. How do you talk to yourself? That was something that you mentioned earlier. What does your self-talk sound like. And this, I think, is similar. When I talk about body image, I put it on a spectrum. One end is negative, the other end is positive, neutrality is in the middle. And I look at self-compassion very similarly of sometimes we're really hard on ourselves, and sometimes we're maybe very arrogant about ourselves in a very confident way, right? And then there's this kind of like middle space that I also like to refer to as just, can we be objective? Like, oh, today was hard. And just stop right there. There's no judgment. There's nothing behind it. Or even if we go to a workout class, wow, I'm really tired.
Yeah.
We don't have to go into, oh, I'm so weak, or I wasn't as good as this person, or I'm out of shape, right? It's just, oh, yeah, look, okay. I
felt tired today.
I was tired today, right? So even looking at things like self-talk, and we've touched on this too, but like, how are you maybe being held back or not by your body image or food or, movement of, oh, I don't want to go to that dinner because other people will see how I eat, or I don't want to show up to this event because I don't feel like I look good today, or things like that. So considering also, can you continue to show up according to your value system, according to what feels important, regardless of how you feel about those things. And then we also talked about how much time you're spending in front of the mirror, if there's body checking, are you pinching and pulling at yourself, or can you just get ready and walk out the door, if not confident enough that you are you're ready for the day and that you can do the things you need to do. And then something that I also talked about with my colleagues when I was considering this question is not waiting for your body to change to do things, right? So something that we talk about is like big events like maybe marriage, weddings, vacations, all of these things where we may want to have an ideal body, or we want to be on a certain meal plan, or we want to be doing certain things around movement so that we're giving this perception maybe, or that we're giving an impression. And I think just building up that awareness and like letting yourself live your life in the body that you have today.
Yeah, those are all such good tips. So I'm glad you shared that. I want to talk a little more about the disordered eating side, the food side. We've talked about body image, but I want to talk about the disordered eating side because there are patterns that are not serving us very well. And in functional medicine, this is really a delicate conversation because in functional medicine, we rely very heavily on nutrition and on nourishment, as I prefer to call it, of how are you nourishing your body? What are you fueling your body with? Because the fuel does have an impact on the function of the body. And that's science. Like that is biology, and we can't always change it, even though on the flip side of that, it can definitely trigger some disordered eating patterns. Orthorexia is one that's a fixation with healthy foods, right? I think though milder versions of that are there, things like intense macro counting to obtain a specific weight, where they say, oh, I need to lose 3 more pounds. Like who cares about, like, why do we care 3 more pounds? Like, why do you care about that? I think it's such a delicate conversation when we talk about eating of how do we know what we're eating so that we can know that we're fueling ourselves well and pay attention to the labels to make sure that there's not things in there that's unhealthy for our bodies. On the flip side of that, how do we just be okay and get back to, you'll talk about intuitive eating, how do we get back to just connecting our bodies with food and not worrying so much about the details? So will you give your perspective on that of where do we go? How do we find this balance?
Yes, it is a tricky balance.
Yeah,
for sure. So something that I really like to talk to clients about when we're talking about, food, body, exercises, look at a kid, right? Kids are great intuitive eaters. So my framework is intuitive eating. And kids just, they know. Again, it's that intuition. It's that, oh, I'm hungry, so I want to eat. I'm full, I'm done eating. And kids are actually really fascinating. I mean, you watch a toddler and they'll live on goldfish and cheese for for days, and then all of a sudden they want a salad or they want meat, and so their body's kind of signaling to them of, hey, we have a deficit of this thing. And so that is something that I like to talk about with people who struggle with disordered eating is when we look at children, they haven't learned yet all of the things that we've learned or not really learned about about food. And so just considering, and this is where I think a team approach, even if it's just disordered eating, is still helpful. Of what is your medical provider saying? Do you trust them? Would it be helpful to see a dietitian who is educated about disordered eating or disordered patterns? And then sometimes a therapist, right? And being able to recognize, I think permission is a very key part of food. And I was just, talking with you about this before the podcast, of if something that you would maybe deem as unhealthy or bad is the only thing that's available to you that day, but you're hungry, is there permission to eat that thing?
Yeah.
Right? And being able to pull back more from this idea of what's good or bad for the body, and just letting one have permission. Because part of intuitive eating is actually variety as well, And intuitive eating, we are moving away from labels such as good or bad foods, healthy or unhealthy foods. But part of that is just reestablishing, do you have permission to eat? And is there permission to eat what's available? Is there permission to eat variety? Is there permission around food? Which a lot of times I think we learn not to be permissible
for sure.
with a lot of
calorie counting and restriction and diet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, before I worked at Center for Change, I was doing Whole30. I was doing keto, right? And so I very much bought into, these foods are bad. These foods are empty calories. These foods are quote unquote good, healthy, right? And so recognizing though that but my body actually needs carbs, and recognizing I also need protein, and protein does help me feel fuller. I'm also allowed to have dessert. Do I want you to have, fast food for every single meal? No. But if you're on a road trip and that's what's available, is that okay?
Yeah.
And so I think, a key part of intuitive eating is permission, variety. If we're talking about reconnecting to the body, it's getting hunger and fullness cues back and honoring those things. And being able to, I think, just let go of a lot of the things that are mainstream. I think that's also something that I want to point out, is when people are going on diets, or they're going towards any kind of, I want to say, lifestyle change that's actually not really a lifelong change, right?
Yeah.
Is that they're going with something that's trending. And we've seen a lot of I'm sure you've seen a lot of diets that trend in and out. And so also recognizing that if there was one diet that fit everyone, we'd all be on it.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case. So I think also, considering where are you getting your information, and what are the reasons of why you may be eating the way that you are eating.
Yeah, man, it is so nuanced. There's so much to consider here. And from a functional medicine physician perspective, I do actually think that there is a lot of common ground, but it can seem at first like there's not, right? Like functional medicine is known for elimination diets and cutting out quote unquote unhealthy foods and seed oils and inflammatory foods. And there's a certain amount of that is biology, that the body works better on certain fuels than others. But I do think it's context that matters. For someone who's been in a calorie restriction, trying to lose weight for a prolonged period of time, the very first thing is not to put them, in my opinion and in my practice, the first thing is not to put them on an elimination trial. That would be a misstep. The first step is to feed them, and to feed them good, nourishing fuel that is going to trigger their cells to start communicating those messages properly from their bodies. So it really becomes difficult, because processed foods and fast foods and these foods that you could never begin to make at home, they would never taste the same. Those foods are professionally engineered to mess up your own food cues. So we spoke about this before, is I have a little different perspective on intuitive eating, because I've seen where people try, probably without appropriate guidance, but where people try just to rely on intuitive eating. They say, I don't want to count. I don't want to, I don't want to fixate on food. I'm just going to eat intuitively. And then it doesn't work, partially because if they're only eating intuitively with foods that are not nourishing their body, the body will not give you appropriate cues. It can't. It doesn't know how. It doesn't know how to tell you to stop eating a certain amount of these processed chips. The food is engineered to mess up those cues. So, but we do have to take it in context, because if you have someone who is not thriving, they are eating way too little, or they are in unhealthy patterns of eating disorders, or, over restriction, or binging, and et cetera, any of these really harmful eating patterns, even then, the first step is not for me to be like, so we only eat, olive oil. We don't eat seed oils. Like, that's not the first step for that person. The first step is to eat and to take down some of those barriers and to say, listen to your body. And when you're hungry, you eat something. But then hopefully over time, we can start fueling our body. And that's with my approach to weight loss. I am always trying to fuel first, because that restores those cues. That's what restores our body's inherent cues to say, I think I'm full now. You will never get full eating Jelly Bellies. It's really, really difficult to eat enough Jelly Bellies to trigger those satiety cues. Fiber, protein, fats, that's what's meant to trigger those satiety cues. So all of that to say, I think it's nuanced. And I think it depends on where you're starting from. And I think in any of this, you can go too far. You could start with having an eating disorder and give yourself permission to eat, and now you're eating and you're working through, and now you're eating healthier, and now you're eating healthier, and then you're right back into a disordered eating pattern because you're obsessed with only eating healthy. On the flip side of that, if we don't acknowledge that there are, in fact, healthy foods and unhealthy foods, there are foods that do things for our bodies and other foods that do negative things to our bodies. We can't ignore that either. So I don't know. I think we're on the same page, and I think it's a really valuable conversation because people are seeing both sides of this, and I think it's really hard to know where you stand. And so for me, and I want to hear your opinion on this, for me, I would say know where you're starting and your own relationship with food is. If your relationship with food is fine, then by all means, focus on eating vegetables and protein and healthy fats and cutting out sugars. If your relationship with food is not fine, then that may not be the place that you start. You may just have to start with giving yourself permission to eat enough to feel full and to feel fueled.
Yeah.
What thoughts do you have about that? Because I know I don't think we're at odds. I think it is the same. I just think it's different ends of the spectrum, and I think it's really important to recognize how complex it is.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I appreciate the acknowledgement of I work with a very severe population, right? When we're looking at eating disorders, that we need to, if we're thinking about all of the different eating disorders, the way that I talk about it is like a pendulum, right? Regardless of what the eating disorder is, we're starting at one extreme, and then we're going to swing over here into you are following a meal plan, you are engaging in these things with the hope of getting to an intuitive place, a more intuitive place. And that looks different for everyone, right? And so as the pendulum swings, it will start to even out. And that's what I talk to people about. So I appreciate the nuance of this conversation, and also that to acknowledge my specialty is working with eating disorders where we have to fight extreme with extreme to start out. And then we move into, more individualized treatment and particular needs medically or otherwise that a person may have. Also acknowledging that both of us as professionals, and I'm sure you approach this the same way, when I'm in the room with someone, they are the expert on their body, right? You're the expert on your life experience. I can't tell you that how you think or feel or what you're doing is wrong. Right. I can tell you my hopes for you. I can tell you what I view could be helpful, and everyone is the expert on their own life experience. And so I appreciate you bringing that up of everyone's different, and everyone, I think everyone is different in what they need in their body to feel well and what they need to feel like they are living their best life in their own body. Every body is different. Yeah. I think there are, for example, there are some people who I think would do better without gluten, but not everyone is ready to do a gluten-free trial, Absolutely. So if someone comes in and I say, do you have any history of disordered eating patterns? And they say, yeah, it's really hard for me. Then I can help them adjust and say, okay, well, then we've got to get you better in other ways. And at some point we may need to come back to that, but it's not the end all be all. Like, I want to make another note about this, and then I want to hear about your thoughts about disordered eating patterns in general, because we haven't really defined that, the difference between disordered eating and eating disorders. But from my perspective, oftentimes in functional medicine, there's so much pressure on if you just eat the right foods, then you'll be well. And if you're not well, it's because you haven't found the right formulation yet. Either you haven't eliminated the right food, you haven't eliminated enough foods. And you see people going on these more and more extreme diets. And I think it can be so damaging because it like cements in the head, in the brain, this association between
good food equals feeling good. And if I don't feel good, I must be doing something wrong with my food. And I think that's really damaging. I will frequently take people through some sort of elimination trial or food optimizing sort of process. But at some point, if it doesn't get better, then I say, okay, stop changing your food. It's not going to make that. We're not there. Like, it's not your food. Whereas I think online, people will be like, oh, have you tried nightshades? Have you tried almonds? Have you tried cashews?
Yes.
Like, eliminating these things until people come in and they're eating 3 foods, right? So I do think that we, especially functional medicine and the health community, has to really keep a firm tab on what we're doing to tip the scale in really unhealthy directions. So tell me, because we should have gone through this earlier, and we just got talking. What is the difference between disordered eating patterns and eating disorders?
Yeah. I mean, for sure, I think we have been touching on it. We just haven't said it overtly, but for sure, again, how is your eating, your relationship with your body, and your relationship with movement impacting your day-to-day life, right? To be quote unquote diagnosed with anything, that's one of the first things we're looking at is what is the impact? Is it negatively impacting you? And if so, in what ways, right? And I will say there's probably a lot of people in day-to-day life that are high functioning people with eating disorders, right? So some people may not see it as an impediment or as anything that's quote unquote wrong. And not that having an eating disorder is wrong, but people I think will be dismissive, especially because they think they don't look sick enough, right? Something I do want to acknowledge is that binge eating disorder is the #1 eating disorder in the US, and it's also the least treated, right? Because when we go, even middle school, I can remember we learned about eating disorders. It's people who are emaciated, people who are, medically in danger. That's what an eating disorder looks like.
Yeah.
You can have a quote unquote average or normal body shape and size and still have an eating disorder. So I think that's something that I do want to say. We can't look at someone and say, yes or no, you have an eating disorder. Part of it is, how much of your brain space is it taking up? BMI, unfortunately, for me, just from a therapeutic perspective, is a piece of, do you qualify for some types of eating disorders? Other pieces where I would say are disordered are things that you've touched on, or what's your relationship with food? Are you always on a diet? Are you always thinking about, your body, how you want to change it? What are ways that you can do that? And I would say, orthorexia is not something that we technically diagnose because it's not in the DSM. But a lot of people are obsessed about movement.
Causes more psychological discomfort than oftentimes physical disability.
Right, yeah. And so considering, again, how extreme maybe are your relationships with food, movement, body, and how is it impacting your life? Control, I think, is another piece with binge eating, or even bulimia. Probably with all of the disorders, I think we could talk about control. There are eating disorders like ARFID, where it's more sensory and it's more of like a process with your connection or your relationship with food that's more complicated, and it's not really focused on body image at all. So there are, I think, more of a range of eating disorders that we just don't talk about or acknowledge because we've all, at least for me in my public education, kind of been taught of like, here's what an eating disorder looks like and here's what's quote unquote normal. But I think I know very few intuitive eaters in my life. And I think a lot of people are often engaged in more disordered relationships with food, body, and movement than they're aware of, which is why, I've been touching on building that awareness is kind of that first step of acknowledging, do I have a disordered relationship? Maybe, maybe not.
And I actually applaud a lot of women, especially the patients I see who come in and say, I really do want my body to be as healthy as it could be and should be, but I feel like it's causing me angst. My focus, and I have lots of patients who will say, like, I've tried counting macros, I've tried really eating healthy, and it puts my brain into an unhealthy fixation with food. So I really applaud people who can see that. Unfortunately, I don't think we have the tools yet to really help. I think some of the weight loss medications, frankly, can be really beneficial with that for some of the psychology and some of the brain cues that go on that make this harder for some people than others. But we still are missing some tools. But I do think having that awareness of like, I notice I notice my brain is not happy in that state. Like as soon as I start counting macros or as soon as I start, obsessing about it, then my brain is not at a healthy place. And I really, like I said, I applaud those people who can say like, I can't take that route.
Yeah.
That is not the right path for me. I need to come back to a place of, feeding myself and fueling myself and figuring things out that way. Well, this has been such an important conversation. I think we could keep talking, but tell us, is there any kind of wrap up or any kind of summary that you would want to share, anything we haven't shared yet with this group of people who are listening? Is there anything you'd like to say that just in closing?
Yeah. I think I just want to validate that it's hard. I think our culture is hard. I think the pressure, especially that women are put under, is especially difficult. And I think, my ideal would be that we could live in a world where body diversity is acknowledged and that it's accepted and it's more mainstream, right? I think in my ideal hopes and dreams, everyone would be able to have just a relationship with food, not good or bad, just a relationship that people could move their bodies in whatever spaces and ways they feel comfortable with. And we're not there yet as a society. We're not there yet in our culture. And, again, going back to this very individual basis of how do you want to be in your life and how are you showing up and how is that relationship, and just building an open curiosity of, is this what I want? And if it is, great, keep doing what you're doing. And if you are noticing like maybe there is some space for me to change or to be different, start seeking those resources. I do just think that sometimes these conversations are really difficult and can feel really uncomfortable. And oftentimes when we're noticing discomfort, that is a signal of, something could be different, right? And so I think just being patient with yourself and being gentle and being able to just openly be curious about where do you want to go next.
For sure. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Will you tell our listeners where they can find you or the Center for Change?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So again, Center for Change, we are eating disorder specialized. So I don't want everyone walking away from this thinking, I must have an eating disorder. But maybe acknowledging where you are currently with your body, with movement, with food. Center for Change, we do have a location in Cottonwood Heights off of Highland Drive.
In Utah?
In Utah, yes. And then we also, our main facility is in Orem, Utah. And we also serve folks up in Boise, Idaho as well. So we have therapists who, we are not just working with eating disorders. We also work with disordered eating. We work with body dysmorphia. We work with also general mental health, so depression, anxiety, all of the things. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Yes,
thanks for helping us
me.
Understand this and hopefully feel empowered to recognize it if it's an issue in ourselves and take steps to hopefully prevent it or keep it from getting worse and give us some avenues to get the help if we need it.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. A huge thank you to our guest for sharing their insights and time with us. We are grateful for the incredible support from our sponsors and to all of you listening. We couldn't do this without you. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing on your favorite platform. You can find us on our website, upliftforher.com, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you love to listen. And if you found value here today, please share this episode with someone who would benefit from it. Leave us a comment or give us a review. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. Thank you for being part of our community. Stay tuned for our next episode. Lastly, this information is for educational purposes only and not intended to be medical advice.